go into the share screen. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on why honeybees are so important, and of course, the Asian Hornet as part of the Invasive Species Awareness Week. A little bit of agenda for you. We'll start by explaining who am I, why am I here today, and what does the National Bee Unit do? We'll discuss why honeybees are important, what is an invasive species, before we get on to the real meat of the topic today, which is the Asian Hornet, where it's come from, why is it considered a problem, particularly here in the British Isles, its identification, sighting and trapping the hornet, and how you can report the hornet, before we move on to our closing comments and our Q&A session. So by the end of today's webinar, I'm just going to close this side panel down in case that blocks the recording. By the end of today's webinar, you will become a champion, an expert in monitoring, identifying, and reporting the Asian Hornet so that we as a nation and me as part of the National Bee Unit can control and defeat this damaging invasive species. So who am I? My name is Jack Silbrad. I'm a seasonal bee inspector for the Eastern region. I cover an area that includes Cambridge, the surrounding villages, and up towards Peterborough. My background is really bees and disease. I have a first-class degree in microbiology with virology, a lot of cheese disease and beer. And for the last 3 years, I've been managing around 400 colonies the length and breadth of England. I work seasonally in New Zealand, and most recently, I've begun working as a bee inspector. The bee inspectors, as part of the National Bee Unit, work across the country. There are between 60 and 70 of us at any one time, and our primary objective is looking after the health of honeybees. We do this by inspecting colonies, from as small a number of colonies as just one with a hobbyist, all the way up to many hundreds if you're a bee farmer. We're principally looking for disease. Specifically, we're looking for notifiable diseases, which if you're not a beekeeper, these are European and American foul brood. We look at suspect poisonings, be they accidental or intentional, perhaps pesticides or something more malicious. We sample honey to give the consumer confidence that the honey they're eating is safe and unadulterated. And we also look at imports of honeybees and queen bees, looking for these exotic pests. For any beekeepers listening today, if you're not already aware of BeeBase, pop onto Google and give it a search, sign up today and meet your local inspector and get a free MOT for your bees. It's a really nice opportunity to speak to the inspector, talk about husbandry or any other ideas, questions you might have. Generally a really positive experience. We're not there to take away your bees or anything like that. But we are here to search and destroy, not your bees, but invasive species. Principally, the topic of today's talk, the Asian Hornet. As I say, we're here to protect the stocks of honeybees. We work under DEFRA's Healthy Bee Plan to make sure bees are healthy. We want to protect the pollination capacity of our bee stocks, of agricultural and horticultural crops, and also wild plants. We want to block the entry of exotic pests into the UK, and when they are here, we want to eliminate them or limit them to the best of our ability, and that includes diseases which are already here. So on the right-hand side at the top of the picture, top of the slide, we have some really lovely healthy brood or young developing bees, and below that we have the open brood cells, really happy white larvae, almost good enough to eat, nice and shiny segments. These are the things we like to see, if at all possible. So why are honeybees so important? I'm sure this isn't going to come as a big shock to anybody, but bees, particularly honeybees, are a really, really integral part of our food chain. Pollination for human foods, lots of fruits and vegetables. Most of the things you would see on the shelves of your average supermarket in one form or another have had something to do with honeybees or possibly bumblebees. And we're really, really reliant on this species in general, internationally across the globe. 1 in 3 of your mouthfuls of food is probably going to be food that's been pollinated by honeybees. So if you enjoy your fruits and veggies, you're eating their work. And in the UK, they pollinate at least 70 types of crop, just in the UK. And this contributes £400 million to our economy, or 2,000 Ferraris. Other makes of car are available. A single colony of bees, which at about this time of year, being that you've had a pretty rough spring, probably something like 20 to 30,000 bees, rising to 60,000 individuals at the peak of summer, thereabouts. A single colony can pollinate 4,000 meters squared of fruit trees, which is a colossal amount of pollination. You might have seen studies in China where they were using people with paintbrushes to go across fruit orchards to pollinate flowers because the bee stocks weren't available to do it for them. And it's just not as efficient when you've got 20,000 individuals going out there and pollinating flower after flower after flower. Care economy, that just reflects the productivity of those hives. It doesn't reflect the actual cost if we had to employ the same workforce to do that. So bees, again, no surprise, are really, really integral. Without bees, our dinner plate starts to look a little less exciting. Sure, rice, bread, flour, wheat, oats, they're all really good staples, but how many of us want to be eating mainly rice, flour, and oats? Take away 1/3 of your dinner tonight, and I'm sure your plate is going to look a lot less exciting. Here we have a list that I researched a few days ago. I was quite surprised at the sheer quantity of things that bees pollinate, and I've highlighted a few of the more interesting ones, things that people perhaps don't consider quite so much. So when you're frying your bacon in the morning or frying some other veggies for a stir fry and you're using your rapeseed oils or your sunflower oils, these are massively pollinated by honeybees. So we're really, really reliant on these for our cooking oils. We've got coffee, which I know many people, myself included, would not function in the morning without that cup of coffee, pollinated by honeybees. Cotton, the very clothes that we wear, the threads that we go out with and feel fashionable with, reliant on honeybees. And of course, looking down to the bottom of that list, chocolate and the black-eyed peas. Wouldn't the world be a darker place without the tunes of will.i.am? But on a serious note, this is just a small list of the many, many things. So again, driving home this idea, not just in the UK, but globally, honeybees are absolutely crucial. Of course, we have the primary product after pollination, which is honey. I myself and many others are involved in its production. And so again, you've got the livelihoods as well that are connected to this insect, the livelihoods of the people farming it and caring for it. So again, the topic of today's talk, what is an invasive species? You might have heard this phrase being bandied about. You will have heard of non-native species and naturalized species, but what does it actually mean? What is an invasive species? An invasive species is an organism or a species introduced either accidentally or intentionally, very often by human action, into an area or an environment in which it is not normally found. So history can often blur the lines of what is a sort of natural species or supposed to be there. Starting in the UK, in the times of the Romans, they brought rabbits as a food source across to the UK. They're not native, they're certainly naturalized, they're happy, living, reproducing here in the UK, but they're not native. More recently, we had the introduction of the muntjac or barking deer in the top left of the picture, and you see it throughout woodlands in the UK. And boy, did the Victorians like it in their gardens, but it's not natural. It's quite damaging, no natural predators, considered an invasive species. More recently, again, in the 1930s, we had the koi poo, the gentleman in the bottom of the page in the middle. Looks a bit like a beaver or a capybara. And as you've probably guessed, it is a water-loving animal. And it's fantastic at digging in the waterways, grubbing around for roots, really, really happy in the environment that we have here in East Anglia, with lots of fens and waterways and bogs. But hugely damaging, both to those riverbanks and to other plants, to crops that might be reliant on the irrigation provided by those waterways. Since it's been eradicated, things have gotten a lot better, but it was a hugely damaging and invasive species. Are invasive species always bad, or are non-native species always bad? I'm sure you've heard about the grey squirrel and the plight of the red squirrel, so we probably don't have to go over that. But what about the tree bumblebee? Have you ever had a bird box that's been occupied by bumblebees? And if you have, I would wager it's probably the gentleman in the bottom left corner, or in fact, the lady in the bottom left corner, as I suspect. This is Bombus hypnorum, which arrived in the UK in about 2008. It's non-native to the UK. It is native to the same range in terms of latitude across Northern Europe, but not in the UK. It's come over recently. Occupies an environmental niche or ecological niche where it's not displacing anything else. It's getting along quite nicely. It's even gotten as far as Iceland in 2011, which is incredible. How does a bumblebee get to Iceland? Probably through polytunnels and farming, but human action again. Is it a damaging species? Not so much. So, The Asian hornet, then. It is an invasive species. You've heard a lot about it in the news. And boy, is it a nasty sucker. That's not an Asian hornet. Sorry, there must have been a mistake. That's the European hornet. Big friendly giant, native to the UK, really important in our ecological food chains and in the environment. Hang on, let me see if I can find a picture. Just 1 second. The Asian hornet. Here we are. Look at those jaws. Big yellow legs, fearsome looking beastie. Maybe not. This is a Carter bumblebee, not the Asian hornet. Okay, hang on. Try third time lucky. The Asian hornet. Yellow legs, big stripy yellow and black body, pretty huge. Or maybe not. This is a median wasp, native to the UK, not so big after all, probably about 1.5 centimeters in length. Really important in our environment. Fourth time lucky. Already getting tired of it. Look at the stinger on that. 4 yellow legs, black body, terrifying. Although most of you will have realized by now that's not a sting. That's an ovipositor to deposit eggs into trees, into wood. This is the giant wood wasp. Fantastic beast if you can find it. Not invasive, very important in our ecology. Okay, final picture. The Asian hornet. Fearsome, its legs raised in attack, massive jaws, antenna, really, really long, fearsome creature. Not quite, nearly there. This is Vespa mandarinia, sometimes called the giant hornet, fire hornet, murder hornet, you might have heard in media more recently. And it's definitely an invasive species, but not here in the UK and not in Europe. It's found in America, traditionally, or natively, to Asia, Japan, China. Very fearsome creature, is an invasive species, but not for us here in the UK. So when you hear talk of murder hornets, this is what they're referring to, but it's not a concern for us yet. The actual Asian hornet. This is the species we're concerned with today. Black body, 4th yellow band, much smaller. When we talk about invasive species in hornets, this is the picture that the media should be showing. It's not always the case. It's easy to get confused. Also known as Vespa valentina nigrithorax. This is the organism we're talking about today. Before we go on to where it's from and how to identify it, why is this a problem? Because we've seen other invasive species that are living here in the UK, or non-native species, I should say. Not all of them are as damaging. So why is the Asian hornet an issue? The Asian hornet is considered a menace for a number of reasons. The first is that an adult forager will actively predate on honeybees, many, many honeybees. A mature nest can have up to 6,000 individuals. And one of their primary sources of food, in addition to bees, are significant quantities of other local insects. So the first effect of that, of course, is the loss of the honeybees, the loss of the pollination services, the loss of the production of honey, and the impact on the livelihoods of people that are reliant on the honeybee. We then have many other beneficial pollinators, such as the hoverfly you can see being eaten in the picture, butterflies, moths, aphids, other kinds of fly, really, really important for pollination, and also really, really important sources of food for other organisms. We hear each year about how certain kinds of insects are becoming rarer, more scarce in the UK, and how it's affecting the food chain downstream. And now you want to introduce a voracious non-native predator, which is competing for those food sources and eliminating those food sources. So this really negatively impacts the biodiversity and the ecology across the UK in theory, and it's certainly doing so in Europe. Additionally, this hornet is very defensive, especially around its nest. So it does actually pose a risk of physical harm to us as individuals moving around in the countryside or even in urban environments. So the take-home message here is that this hornet can decimate bee stocks, has decimated bee stocks, and can incur significant, or can cause us to incur significant economic damage, both directly and as a result of the cost that we have to incur in managing this insect. So where has it come from and where is it going? As we've heard, the Asian hornet, sometimes known as the yellow-legged hornet, Vespa valentina nigrithorax, native to Asia. And if it's come from, where is it going? As we've heard, probably in pottery. It's got a very nice climate in France, not dissimilar to our own. It's fairly temperate, fairly warm. In south, very nice, fairly warm, moist, plenty of food, and it makes itself at home. It becomes naturalized. And as it naturalizes, it reproduces. Queens go forth and establish new nests, up to 6,000 individuals, many queens in the autumn time to start new nests, and it spreads. And it naturalizes in Spain, Italy, and Portugal. And there, many, many nests are having a huge impact on the beekeeping industry. In 2016, we have our first sighting and nest found in Tetbury, and we eradicate that nest. But since then, Jersey, small island off the coast of France, becomes invaded by hornets where it is naturalized. So we have, in the years 2016 to 2018, more than 150 nests found and destroyed. And Jersey is a really, really important case study because, again, it's an island, a small island, admittedly, but it has a similar climate, similar ecology to the UK. And as a proof of principle, the Asian hornet has had no trouble setting up many, many nests there. I don't have a figure for the number of beehives being kept on Jersey, but considering how much food 150 nests on an island as small as Jersey would need, consider the size and the availability of food here in the UK. And it's easy to see that should it become established in the UK, should any of those nests go undetected, it could spread very rapidly and become a real issue. 2017, we have one nest, then 4 nests the following year, 3 nests in 2019, and a nest in 2020. So we are finding them and they are being eliminated. But even so far this year, there have already been 2 sightings of hornets. So we must keep our eyes open for this invasive species. How do we keep our eyes open? How do we identify the Asian hornet? First thing is that its size. It's not the huge killer flying hornet that we often hear about in sensational media headlines. It's relatively small. A queen will be up to 3 centimeters, workers around 2.5, and they're smaller than our native Asian hornet. So if you're familiar with Vespa crabra, and I'll show you a picture in a moment, if you're familiar with the European hornet, gentle woodland giant, comes out at night time, often flies into your windows when you've got your lights on, it is smaller. It's also mostly black on the body. So when you're seeing these big yellow flying hornets, consider, is it black or is it more yellow? If it's more yellow, probably European. If it's more black, time to move on to the next stage. Does it have a yellow 4th band? That's the 4th band on the abdomen. And from the top and the back, this looks like the tail end of the abdomen. We'll see in some later pictures that the underside of the abdomen is a little more yellow. So do look for the other signs as well. But generally speaking, if you're seeing it on the wing or landed on a nice sunny patch of foliage, for example, it's that 4th band that you're going to see towards the end of its abdomen. The yellow-legged hornet, as the name suggests, yellow legs, yellow legs. Orange face, dark brown to red eyes. One thing in particular that this hornet does that is not common in other insects in the UK is its behavior during hunting. When it's hunting insects, it will often hawk or fly in a sort of swooping motion, left and right. And that's because as Vespa valentina hunts, it takes insects on the wing. It doesn't pounce on them when they've landed. It doesn't wait to ambush them. It will literally fly back and forth, hawking left and right, to take insects on the wing, capture them, kill them, and take them back to the nest. So here we can see a nice comparison with the European hornet on the left. We can see that its body is an orange color, sort of brown when it's looking darker, yellow abdomen, brown legs, yellow face, in fact, as well. Compared to Vespa valentina or the Asian hornet on the right, you can see it's about 1/3 smaller, mostly black, dark face, yellow legs. And then, as I said earlier, from the side, you can see a bit more yellow, but on the wing, from the side, you can see a bit more yellow, but on the wing, you're generally going to see it as a small black flying insect. And if it's landed, you can't really see the sides. You're going to be looking for that 4th yellow band. We mentioned the hawking behavior. So if this video will kindly work, this is taken, I think, from Portugal or Spain. And you can see the Asian hornet in action. Here it is flying outside of a beehive, legs extended, waiting to catch bees on the wing. And there we are, one captured as it came in. You can see it flying away being taken back to the nest for food. And they'll do this. Once they've found a beehive or a nest, perhaps a wild nest, they will hawk and wait outside of the entrance and continuously predate those returning foragers. So that nest is getting depleted of workers. It's not getting the pollen and the nectar that it would normally be receiving. That's going to impact the end product for the beekeeper, but for the bees, it's even worse. They're constantly having their food depleted, constantly losing their workers. And over time, what you can often see is that the beehive kind of becomes almost bullied. The workers will sit at the entrance, they'll raise their front legs and their jaws menacingly, trying to ward these hornets away, but they won't leave. And slowly but surely, the nest, the beehive becomes depleted, and you can even lose the colony. And this has been a massive issue in Portugal, Spain, and France. Lots of interesting devices to keep the hornets out of the nest, to keep them away from the flying bees, but it's yet to be seen whether they're effective in the long term. So identifying the hornet. Here we have the European hornet nest, very similar nest to Vespa valentina, as you'll see in a moment. But again, even in a nest of hornets, it should be really obvious here that we're looking at European hornets. Very yellow, light-coloured head, brown body, not Vespa valentina, even though that paper nest looks very, very similar. With the hornets on the nest, you can see, even from a bit of distance, they're quite dark looking. You can see that single yellow band, but they're quite dark, they're quite small. So when will you see this hornet? In the springtime, you are going to see the emerging queens. Remember, they're a bit bigger, around 3 centimeters. And I've highlighted the letters P and R. P and R as in protein, because these are the food sources that queens are looking for. They want to get their ovaries up and running. They want to lay lots of eggs. They want to feed their developing workers, that first generation that's going to take the nest forwards. So they're looking for protein. And at this time of year, the Asian hornet is looking to set up what we call the primary nest. The primary nest is a small nest, probably about the size of a football, that ubiquitous phrase we always hear, about the size of a football, and it's generally quite low to the ground, in bushes, in hedges, shrubbery. This is the first nest. As the season progresses and the size of the colony grows, you end up with about 6,000 workers in a nest, and the queen migrates to a secondary nest, normally an aerial nest somewhere higher up, tips of trees, tops of buildings, those sorts of places. Fairly difficult to spot because they're normally, even though they're large, normally very high up. So whether you'll see one of these, hopefully not, and if you do, you'll know what you're looking at, hopefully, but it's the workers you'll be looking for, the traffic, the adult workers flying to and fro to get resources for the nest. And in the autumn time, you're going to see sugar-hungry queens and workers. The protein food sources are starting to dry up. The nest is starting to shut down. The adults and the new queens, which are going to go forth through the winter to start a new nest in the spring, they're looking for sugar. And we can use this. We can use this to trap the hornet. Springtime, you can set up bait traps with bits of fish. And in the autumn time, you can set up sugar traps with sugar syrup, not using honey, using clean sugar syrup, sugar and water. Nice comparison on the right there as well. We have a little, what I suspect is Vespa vulgaris, the native wasp to the UK, one of the native wasps. And you can see again, very yellow, much smaller than an Asian hornet. So even at a quick glance, if it's black and medium sized, very different to other things that you might see flying around in the UK. You can trap the Asian hornet, and there'll be a link in the Zoom panel. Check out the Animal Partner Health Agency video on building your own trap. Just a bit of recycling from around in the house. You can set up an observation post, be it in your back garden, could be in your apiary if you're concerned, or if you're near a point of entry like a port. Nice place to trap hornets. But crucially, following this design, you won't be trapping and killing native species. So it's a really, really useful trap. Really good. Have a look at that. So what to do if you spot an Asian hornet? I'm going to go over it again. You're going to be sick of this by the end, but dark orange face, dark red brown eyes, black body, mostly black, yellow legs, yellow fourth band, 2.5 centimeters big, smaller than a European hornet. What to do if you spot it? You need to tell us. You need to notify the non-native species secretariat, and the easiest and the quickest way to do this, so get your smartphone out, pop onto your app store and search the term Asian Hornet Watch. You should then be presented with an app that looks like the picture on your right, and this is free for iPhone and Android. dead easy to use, free to download, quickest, easiest way to report your sighting. If you don't have a smartphone, or perhaps you're not able to get onto your app store, the second method you might want to use is to go online and look at the non-native species alert form. Here you can enter your dates and comments about where you've seen it. And if it's safe and practical to do so, you can include a picture. If there's a really busy nest somewhere, don't go anywhere near it. You don't need a photograph. Your description, your location, that's a great starting point to go forwards and really triage what it might be that you found. But if you can get a picture, that'll really help. And as a final resort, if you can't get online for whatever reason, but you do somehow have access to an email account without the internet, then send an email through to alert nonnative@ceh.ac.uk. But our preferred method, if you can, is that free, easy to use Asian Hornet watch app. So, very brief tour de force, but you are now a master of identifying, reporting, and defeating the Asian Hornet. And we're going to do this through our monitoring in the springtime for those protein-hungry queens, in the summertime looking for one of those 6,000 workers that might be flying around, and in the autumn time when we've got the sugar-hungry queens and workers. And we can do this using traps. You've seen the link to do that. We know how to identify the Asian Hornet. Smaller size, mostly black body, yellow fourth band, yellow legs, orangey dark face, dark red brown eyes. And if you think you've seen it, go to the Asian Hornet Watch app or report it online. So thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, we'd now be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Jack. That was brilliant. I thought that list of foods that are pollinated by honeybees was so interesting, and clothing as well. I hadn't really even considered that. And then so useful as well to have the photos of all the kind of common native species that are confused with the Asian Hornet next to it. It's quite easy to see how they could be confused.
So many similarities, lots of yellow, lots of black. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to put any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, but I've got a couple in the meantime. So I was just going to ask, is there anything else that that anyone can do to help protect bees? Any other sort of tips for people?
I think the first thing to do would be, before I answer sort of the question directly, is pop online and have a look at the National Bee Unit Invasive Species page, because it has some really, really simple tips about how to avoid bringing new species into the UK. But just as some practical tips for bees and the wider ecology, be conscious about where you're going. If you're visiting a farm in a different country, if you're going caravanning, if you're bringing, food, plant matter, animals back into the UK, just be really conscious about the materials that you have, the boots you might be wearing, anything that might be attached to the tread of your tires in your car, anything that might be hiding. If you're importing animals or foodstuffs, just make sure you're really well read up on what you need to do once they come to the UK. Where do you need to send those materials? Do you need to notify or make anybody aware? It's not about finger wagging or trying to catch people out, but it is about being biosecure, looking after our ecology and our natural environment. If you want to help bees in general, of course, we always hear about planting food, planting nectar-rich flowers for different times of year. A water source is a really good one. And if you're a beekeeper, be a hobbyist of starting yesterday, maybe you've been doing bees for years, pop along to BeeBase, sign up, get that free MOT for your bees, because our bees are as good as our neighbours' bees. And if we've all got really outstandingly healthy, happy bees, then we can all be really confident of a great honey crop and looking after those essential pollination services.
Brilliant. We've got a couple of questions coming through. So first up, how far do hornets travel from their nest?
That's a really good question. I would imagine, if I remember from my reading, hornets will travel at least a few miles. And this is actually really impertinent, not just for foraging, but also for the spread. Queens will move, as I say, a number of miles from the nest to hibernate, to set up new nests. And it hasn't taken them very long to move across France. A few miles a day, maybe they stop to feed, maybe they stop to rest, and then a few more miles. So a considerable distance. I can get you a more precise figure. If you want to leave your details, I'll be happy to send you an email and get back to you more thoroughly. But certainly a significant distance, which is why when we find nests, there's such a big contingency plan, an operation really to look at the wider area, especially if we think queens have been produced.
Brilliant. And when is the best time to trap? Is it now?
So the best times to trap are, I mean, you can trap all year. You can trap all year. The best, because if we can identify workers and know that there's a nest in the area, that's essential. But the two really important times of year are the spring and the autumn. So in the springtime, remember PR for protein, the new queens that might have overwintered from last year, which are going to go forwards and produce a new nest this year, they're looking for protein. If we can catch those and stop them from establishing nests, not only will we have removed future nests, but if any of those nests somehow went undetected for a whole year, then we've also removed the capacity for that nest to produce more queens for the following season. And that's really the impetus of the autumn trapping, because those autumn nests will start producing queens for the next year. But at this time of year, they're looking for carbohydrates, for sugar, for energy. So we can trap them in the autumn around, I'd say, probably from September onwards. But again, I'll double check that. Sugar traps to catch the next season's queens in the autumn.
Is it possible to MOT a wild bee colony? They're in a bee box high in a tree.
So this is one of the drawbacks of sort of inaccessible bee boxes, garden hives, tree hives, log hives, whatever you want to call them. Bees do not struggle for habitats. There are more honeybees alive in the world and more beekeepers than there have ever been, ever. However, it's one species that we're reliant upon for that 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food. So where we are considering keeping bees, it's really important to make sure that if we are going to keep them, that they're in a hive that can be managed or inspected easily. But that said, if you have set up a traditional or natural home for honeybees, you can still get it registered on BeeBase. It is still possible, though not always necessarily easy, to inspect those colonies. And the very last thing that a bee inspector wants to do is destroy a nest of bees. So just knowing that it's in the area, particularly if it's in an area where there are problems emerging and we're starting to find disease, it's not necessarily about always being able to go in and have a look, but being aware will help us plan our actions going forwards to limit the spread or emergence of any more disease. So if you do have one of these nests, do get it registered. Bee inspectors are really enthusiastic about bees. They're not going to wag the finger. They'll probably be pretty enthusiastic and pretty interested, but get it signed up, get it registered.
There's a couple of questions about where in the UK nests have been found so far. I think probably the best thing to do with that is to go onto Google and search for DEFRA Asian Hornet. There's a rolling news page which has details of all of the nests that have been found in the UK over the last few years. There's another one asking, if you find a bee struggling, should you give it honey or sugar water?
Always sugar water. Never feed bees honey. The reason we don't want to feed honey is that we have no idea of knowing, firstly, where that honey has come from. And even if we do know where it's come from, honey is a fantastic vector for disease. Most of the worst bee diseases are carried in honey and spread to other colonies, if not by the beekeeper, then via honey that they're robbing from die-out colonies or robbing from spillages of honey or from unsuspecting, very well-meaning people, but perhaps unsuspecting. So you must never, ever feed bees honey, because we just cannot guarantee that it's going to be disease-free. And ultimately, if you see a bee struggling, it doesn't need, a lot. It just wants a quick energy boost. So if you really want to feed it and you really feel like you have to do something, a teaspoon of sugar water is more than sufficient.
That's really interesting. I hadn't realised that about honey. So yeah, very good to know. Are there any differences in appearance between Queen Asian Hornets and worker Asian Hornets?
So ostensibly, they look, in terms of coloration, the same. It's that size difference, and it's quite a subtle size difference. If you consider that an Asian Hornet queen that's flying around isn't going to be in a state to lay eggs, she's sort of slimmed down for that flight. So you might expect her abdomen to be a little bit bigger, hence the sort of 0.5 centimeter difference in size, which for a 3 centimeter insect, that's still considerable. That's still, 1/6 bigger than a worker. But as you see these things flying around on the wing, you're unlikely, unless it's landed and you can get a really good look at it, you're unlikely to notice that difference. But in terms of coloration, exactly the same. Black body, yellow fourth band, yellow legs, dark coloured face with dark red-brown eyes.
Brilliant. And there are some ID resources on the website. I can't actually get to the National Bee Unit link while I've got Zoom open, but I'm going to put in our website address into the chat box, and then I'll link to everything from there so people can get to all of the resources.
Brilliant.
Do we have any other questions quickly? Just give a couple of minutes for people. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention, Jack, just before we finish?
I think just be aware. So if you're out walking in the autumn time, a really good place to look for all sorts of insects, not just the Asian hornet. When the ivy's in flower, when we're talking about sort of sugar hungry insects, the ivy flower is one of the latest flowering, but really rich sources of nectar, really rich source of sugar. So on a sunny day, particularly on those sort of frosty autumn mornings when insects are a bit drowsy, go and find yourself a nice big ivy bush. Stop and stand for a few minutes and just watch and see what's coming and going, because many insects will land on a sunny patch, warm up in the morning, they'll be there for the food source. And if there are Asian hornets, there's a really good chance that they'll be hanging out there too. So that's a really simple, almost zero effort. Go out and get your step count and do an Asian hornet watch while you're at it. That's a really good thing you can do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, we've got 4 more questions. So if anyone has any others, get them in now. And then once we've done that, I think we're going to close. So any natural predators of Asian hornet?
Not as far as I know. Not as far as I know. I'm sure there are sort of parasitic insects that might try and parasitize the nests, much in the same way that hoverflies parasitize wasp nests. But again, this is almost an apex insect predator. At least in the UK and across Europe, being an invasive species, no natural predators here. So really important that if it does arrive, we're really the only things that it's going to be competing with.
Great. And on a similar note, actually, one for me, we've heard sometimes in the news about bees kind of swarming hornets. That's not something that native bees do, is it?
It is not. So in Asia, they have a different species of honeybee. Here we have Apis mellifera, the Italian honeybee, if you like, or the European honeybee. In Asia, we have Apis cerana. It's a slightly different bee to look at. It's a little bit smaller, and it's naturally evolved alongside these predatory insects. And so it has evolved this natural defense that you referenced, this sort of balling behavior. And what this does to a hornet is raise its body temperature. In that ball of bees, the bees have essentially uncoupled their wings from their flight muscles, which is, if you like, a bit like having a car in neutral and just revving the engine, rev. But as those flight muscles are working, they're generating heat. And just that small difference in body temperature of about 0.5 degree tolerance between the hornet and the honeybees allows the bees to essentially cook the hornet. I mean, it's not, deep fried or anything, but it gets too hot to survive. And that's their primary defense. They're not strong enough to bite or sting hornets to death, but they can ball them and cook them thermally.
Very interesting. There's another question here about whether there's going to be a sort of publicity program for the public. I think I can probably answer that one. So we and the National Bee Unit do kind of ongoing sort of awareness raising work around Asian hornet. This is part of that. And we work with lots of partners. But if you are looking for, we have lots of free ID resources. So we have things like alert posters that you can sort of put up anywhere really, and ID sheets that you can give up for free. So if you contact us, I'm going to put the website in the chat box. We can send you those materials and help to raise awareness. And then what looks like the final question, will the hornet eat mining bees? Yes,
I would imagine it does. It's a voracious predator. There was a really good presentation given, and perhaps I could dig out the slides. But there's a lot of work going into looking at exactly what is the hornet eating when it arrives. That's a really pertinent question to understand the impact that it will have on the local ecology. And it is voracious, and omnivorous, if you like. It will eat a very wide range of insects. It's not fussy, all sorts of things. So solitary bees, bumblebees, flies, moths, butterflies, beetles, aphids, all of these pollinators or food sources for other insects or mammals or birds. A lot of it is fair game to the hornet. It is voracious.
Brilliant. I think that's all the questions. So just to say a huge thank you, Jack. That was really, really interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Useful. I'm going to put the talk online afterwards for anyone who can't attend and if anyone wants to revisit it. And then, I've put the website in the chat box. Go there and I'll put all the links to everything that Jack's mentioned, and check out the National Bee Unit website as well. So yeah, thank you very much, Jack, and thank you for everyone for coming.
Thanks for coming, guys. Have a good afternoon.
Everyone. Thanks.